This is the Night Shift Podcast, powered by Black and Gold Banneret, your home for news and analysis from all UCF night sports. The Night Shift starts now.
And welcome in. Of course, I am Kyle Nash, the student of the game, here with the Sultan of Stickball himself, my good friend, Eric Lopez. Welcome into this edition of Night Shift. And for those of you that haven't heard yet out there in Night Nation, Big 12 Media Day is taking place this week. And Eric, the hullabaloo was all over the place. And fresh off of the preseason all-conference team, technically not having a UCF player on it, although Lee Hunter counts. You know, he hasn't played the staff yet for Texas Tech and had to get bought to end up out there.
We'll bring that up. We'll bring that up later in the program. What do you have to say about that?
Of course. But listen, obviously was the big news out there was Scott Frost talking to the media once again as a coach out there at Big 12 Media Days. And I know I have my thoughts and opinions being, you know, one who covers a lot of football here on the Black and Gold Banneret.com and the Night Shift. But Eric, what was your impression of what Frost had to say?
You know, it was interesting. Obviously, Big 12 Media Days going on 2 days. UCF was in day one on Tuesday. Usually it's a coach and a bunch of players. And you knew that the media, the national media, let's be honest, Kyle, with all due respect, very lazy people, very not creative human beings, with all due respect. You know what's coming. And what's coming was all the questions about Nebraska and everything like that. And it's to me, it's annoying because there's so many interesting stories out there. Because I love media days. I love media days in all sports. Because to me, I look at media days as to me now, football season's here. Like, you know, you and I have, you know, we've argued on group text about, you know, you would send out some football stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to hear football. You know, I'm one of those that needs to get away for a while. Right. This week.
I ain't even mad at that. But go ahead.
Or to your credit, you're 365, 24/7 football. This week is the week where the light bulbs go on, and it's like, all right, we're in football mode now.
That's right. Yes.
And so it's interesting. And what's interesting is this is a UCF team that a lot of people don't know anything about, really. Yeah. I mean, there's nearly 70 new faces on this team. It's unbelievable. Big turnover. And so media days to me is a great opportunity to learn about this team. But yeah, and I get it. Scott Frost has got a new staff and his comeback. But the problem with the national media days that it's become kind of a really a waste of time, in my opinion. I personally like the localized media days better because the localized, I'd like to think in a few weeks, whenever we have the local media day, nobody's going to waste our time with, hey, what did you learn from Nebraska? Who cares?
Well, we've already asked those questions here, too.
Right, and that we already know how he feels about it. When he references it by that place and won't reference it by – odds are that means it probably didn't – you know, it's not a big fan of talking about it. And It didn't go well. We saw the results. It didn't go well. I don't think that you need a brain surgeon to go with that. And so, you know, but yet, here we are. Scott Frost is the headline of day one of the Big 12 because of a quote that he may have said on the record or off the record. We don't even – that's for dispute. And it's something that I go into detail in the if you go to blackandgoldbanneret.com.
There he is.
I write a column of the things that we learned from Big 12 Media Days from a UCF standpoint. And the big headliner that came out was Scott Frost, I guess Chris Vanini, who's been on this show before. And I know Chris. I like Chris. Does good work at The Athletic. Mm-hmm. I guess asked him what he learned from Nebraska, and Scott's quote was, "What did he learn? From that experience? He's like to not to take the wrong job, right?" And that was, and all of a sudden that just the sirens went off, and everybody like, whoa, like don't take the wrong job. That is the exact quote Scott Frost was quoted on saying about what he learned from Nebraska. Don't take the wrong job. That was it. And all of a sudden, all the sirens went off, and all the national media that wasn't even there, it's like, what? Did he say that? How can he say that? And of course, Nebraska people, because they, you know, Nebraska fans, most of them live in Nebraska. There's nothing to do there except complain about life, because I would too if I lived in Nebraska. Because what else is there to do? I'm sorry that you live in an area that there's nothing to do, and that we live in a city that actually has a million things to do. They flipped out about it, even though we don't know the context of that quote. And that was kind of like, and it just kind of like, golly, because I've always said it. I want coaches and players to be authentic. I want them to be honest and speak, right? Isn't that what we want, Kyle, when we're at these media things? We don't want,
100%. Definitely don't want somebody who says they're going to go 1-0 57 times, not referencing anybody in particular, of course. But, that we are looking for authentic. You're accurate. Yes, sir.
But now the problem is when stuff like this gets overblown, which is what this was, overblown. Now, if you're Scott Frost and UCF, people are like, whoa, what's that about, right? And now what happens? Now they're going to be more cautious moving forward. And who takes the brunt of that? Us. Yes. That don't give a crap. But he's going to be a lot more, and that's unfortunate because I think Scott has a lot of thoughts. And I wrote about this in that column is, first of all, well, let me get your thoughts. I've not heard your thoughts. My thoughts are is you can read it on the site, but I want to hear your thoughts because I don't know your thoughts on this quote. A lot of people have thrown out their opinions on it. And there's details to this story, which I even highlight in the article where like Mark Daniels on the radio show on Wednesday morning highlighted the fact where it kind of gave us an idea of what the idea, where kind of the tone was around that situation. So again, read the article there, but I want to hear your thoughts, Kyle, when you heard about this and your reaction to this whole kind of booza, whatever you want to call it, drama that with this one quote.
And of course, you referenced the Bridge, which is a mainstay of morning radio here in Orlando. I mean no disrespect to either the Bulldog, Mike Bianchi of the Orlando Sentinel, nor the voice of UCF, Mark Daniels, who hosts the Bridge leading into, his portion of the radio day there. Listen, I know them. I see them. Some of them at Magic games and UCF events all alike. I've spoken to Chris Vanini. I've been in scrums with him. Here's the thing, and I say all that to point out Mark Daniels and even the Bulldog himself isn't there for some of these practices and stuff. It's Matt Murschel of the Orlando Sentinel. Shouts to him. Whoever heard Scott Frost say all of this already? It's not the point you made earlier, and you heard me just kind of drop in like a dime there saying, well, he said it already. He even mentioned things that are tied to it at the introductory press conference going back to, what was it, Eric? You were there. I couldn't make it because I'm in a damn van.
December. It was back in December.
I'm in a van on a road trip or something. I couldn't make it.
Correct.
The Sultan of Stickball there at a football thing like that where I'm not. I'm still embarrassed about it. But the punchline is this. Even then, what was the quote there? It's something along the lines, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it perfectly right. But that's the one where he eloquently said, sometimes you need to learn when to stop climbing and just be happy.
Yes.
How is that different than don't take the wrong job? It was all in the framing of the story. And listen, I'm not trying to say that Chris Vanini is trying to character assassinate Scott Frost. In Vanini's perspective, he probably thinks that's impossible to do in the UCF space. But the Nebraska fans have seen the headline and, well, listen, you're in the space now. And even Dan Patrick in a national article has come out and said, I think it was SI, said that it's a clickbaity culture. I don't need Dan Patrick to tell me that. But this isn't exactly what happened. Entirely too big a deal has been made about this. And it's incredibly frustrating, Eric. Especially if a guy like Frost, to your point, comes out, does his part of the media exchange by being authentic. Heck, I got authentic stuff out of him in 2017 before it was cool, right?
Well, that's the thing people don't understand because I was around Scott those 2 years, 16, 17. You were as well.
I got your phone number.
Correct. But even in 2017, especially, we started to see the dry humor of Frost. Frost could give you a little dry humor in there that sneaks in. You're like, whoa, that was a pretty good line. Like, this was a good line. I think people took this the wrong way. They made it sound like he took a shot at Nebraska. That's not necessarily true. He may have said that was the wrong job because it was the wrong job for him. Maybe the results kind of prove that out. It didn't work. So what's he saying that's false on that? Plus, if the way Mark described it, and I kind of believe Mark's side of the story, he obviously knows the parties involved in that.
Of course.
That it appears that and we both have covered many tons of media days. where a lot of times we're walking by coaches or players and they might say something off the kilt, like thinking like, hey, what'd you think of that guy? You know what I mean? Like, it's just something off remark, because that's kind of the environment. And I think Scott did that. Now, you could say Scott should have known better because it's a national thing versus a local thing. Like, if he says that and you and Matt Rochelle are around him, no big deal. I don't think either one of you makes a big fuss about it. But because it's a national guy, he doesn't know if he's being sarcastic or if that's whatever. He doesn't know him as well. So he runs with the tweet and it explodes. And then, as Mark explained, and again, I encourage people to check out the segment on the bridge. I put the link in the article. By the time Frost came out, because this is the thing with Big 12 Media Days now and all these national media days is you got to do interviews with ESPN. You got to do interviews with Fox. You got to do interview with all these outlets now have their own little rooms. God forbid we all, And so by the time Frost got done doing all his media obligations, he comes out and next thing you know, people are telling him, hey, man, did you say that? And then they're like, what are you talking about? And then it becomes this big firestorm over nothing. And this is why he doesn't want to talk about that place. Because what do you want, because if he says something, it's going to be taken out of context and people are going to run with it. This is why people don't want to are very close to the vest with the media, Kyle. And that's what bothers me among this.
No, and I'll even add that and say this. I am very aware of the humor you talk about with Scott Frost. Heck, I'm the dude that, in my opinion, was the first question where he started to answer more honestly about UCF and the American being left out of the national. It feels like an eternity ago. But, I'm like, ooh, he took some extra shots there, or responding to, hey, is it a distraction that all this stuff's happening? I mean, the Halo game dropping is a distraction too, fellas. We deal with distractions. It's part of football. That's the kind of humor you're talking about. The whole don't take the wrong job comment, that's him deprecating himself, not Nebraska. Are you kidding me? The whole reason that Nebraska was able to pull him from a job that he loved, by his words, not mine, was because of how he feels about Nebraska. And this insecure fan base has decided he's taking shots. Listen, the only shots that need to be taken apparently are the ones getting you drunk enough to think he's got a problem with your school. Apparently.
Well, right. Like I even saw where like some of the media, we're snickering at what Frost here. Here's a quote from Vanini, quote, I said I wouldn't leave UCF unless it was some place you could win a national championship. I got tugged in a direction to try to help my alma mater, and I didn't really want to do it, but it wasn't a good move. I'm lucky to get back to a place where I was a lot happier. That's a guy talking in retrospect. He now realizes that. And I can tell you, being around there in 2017, that was not an easy decision for him. He generally,
he was yes. Gosh, I saw him at the weekly presser after he privately told the team that he was going and that the upcoming game was his last as the official head coach. He was a mess. And by the way, he was pulled in a direction. That direction's name is Tom Osborne, right? We're clear on that. We were clear on that then.
His father lived there. Now, and we get it. It was his alma mater. We get it. I never
doesn't corner him and ask him himself personally, as we've all heard happen by now. Right. I truly believe he doesn't leave because while his dad lives there, you know what else had just happened at the time, Eric Lopez? He had just become a father. That doesn't exactly inspire you to move. I can speak to that personally. Okay, listen,
I agree.
I had trouble attending Super Bowl parties when I had my baby. I'm just saying, my first baby even. So, yeah.
No, I agree. I agree. And again, he probably realizes in retrospect, yeah, that was a bad move. That's okay. Like, I don't understand, and that's part of the story. So,
yeah, I don't think anyone would argue that. Heck, on this podcast, at some point I had mentioned, granted, I didn't do it at the time because I was not with the Banneret yet, but I've been on the show talking about his offense wasn't going to fit in what would have been then the Big Ten, right? So I'm just saying. But for all of that kerfluffle, scuttlebutt, and silliness that took place, there was also some other stuff that Frost talked about. And I want to hear kind of your take on this too.
Yeah.
He mentioned the Big 12 as a conference, a league, a place that if you of course, he means UCF football team, do the right things and do everything right, you can win a conference championship. granted, this is a man managing expectations in the form of Scott Frost, whose very first press conference, he's like, let's not expect undefeated, but right.
Sure.
And you mentioned the lack of well-known faces, so to speak. I mean, you got your Rule Belts and your Miles Montgomerys and all this, but is this league in the Big 12 wide open in your mind?
I think that you can make the argument that it is. The Big 12 clearly believes that they decided not to do a media poll because they didn't want it to be perceived one way or the other that one team was better over the other. If you look at odds makers, the worst team in the Big 12 is projected to win 5.5 games versus the team that is supposedly maybe the best team, like in Arizona State, projected to win around 8.5, 9.5. That's a pretty small margin. You look at last year, Arizona State, that's been used a lot as an example this week about they were picked last year and they won the Big 12 title and got to the playoffs. So, yeah, I think people feel that this league is wide open, and I think Scott Frost feels that way as well, that anything could happen if you built this team cohesiveness. He has been quoted of saying he likes the talent on this team. Now, when a media outlet asked him, do you have a lot of talent? He kind of we don't have a full amount of talent. We have talent, which basically was code word for, hey, we may not have the depth yet. All right. But we have depth talent that can play players. I think that's the question. I mean, the Big 12 tends to beat each other up in the league. You have questions about certain teams that brought quarterbacks. And we'll get into this more when we talk Big 12 extensively about the teams that is the target this year is the team that's being talked about, not necessarily for the roster, but how they got the roster. And then the team that was the talk of the town last year is kind of quietly under the radar. But I want to talk about that a little bit later. I want to keep this from a UCF standpoint. But you mentioned it. UCF has no players in the all-conference team. None. Zero. Zilch.
No receivers that have caught a pass
right
for this program last year.
Right. And Montgomery, obviously, who made the trip, the running back's projected to be the star running back, taking over for R.J. Harvey. But it's been interesting.
That's even I don't mean to interrupt you, Eric, but that's even in some conjecture, right? There's a lot of people claiming that Nixon might take that. So it's a whole.
I can tell you that Scott Frost pumped him up. Miles Montgomery made the trip. I mean, he's one of the veterans. He's got a chip on the shoulder. He says, I think most of these players are. That was the sense I heard. And it makes sense, right? A lot of these players probably felt they got, jilted somewhere else.
Yep.
This is their opportunity to shine. So there's going to be a chip on the shoulder on this roster with guys like Miles Montgomery who can prove, hey, this is my backfield. Because remember, at Cincinnati, he had to share the backfield. He comes to UCF. Ends up, he thought he would be a 50-50 maybe split with R.J. Harvey. Turns out R.J. takes up pretty much 80%, 90%, whatever.
I mean, can you be mad about it? But also, I'm not sure that was his first choice to have happen, of course.
Correct. So I think from a UCF standpoint, I think a lot of people, to your point that you're making, though, is I think a lot of people would tell you that the running back position is still maybe the strongest position that UCF has on the roster.
Correct.
Despite losing a second-round NFL draft pick in R.J. Harvey. So I think UCF is going to lean on the offense to run the football. Is the offensive line good enough? We'll find. That's one of the questions we'll have to find out in the next month or so. It was interesting to hear Frost and some of the players at UCF talk about Kelly being the best defensive player in spring, that he was the best player, that he disrupted a lot of the offense, and that he had an incredible spring. Your reaction to that, Kyle, that Kelly is a guy that's getting some buzz here from the UCF players and coaches.
Yeah, Nigel Kelly is a guy that's gotten buzz. I mean, first of all, it's because he was a transfer from Miami doing his thing, and it was a big deal. And then we didn't see it so much in the field of play. Not to say that he was horrible or anything like that, but the juice did not match the squeeze of hype that we got in the preseason. Now, this could all change. He could come out and have a big season. I'm with all that. Malachi Lawrence, another year under his belt, more experienced, a leader. UCF doesn't have necessarily a history of great defensive ends, but there's an opportunity that can change here, especially in a league like the Big 12. But you mentioned the offensive line, Eric. What makes me excited for the offensive line, and I would pose the argument today that they're the second best group on offense as a position group, is the offensive line, because we've seen Scott Frost quietly build a good offensive line. right? The last time we've seen tackles on offense as a duo as good as Wyatt Miller and Aaron Evans, I can't immediately think of it. Now, granted, they might have seen some better interior players in that time, but as the tackles go, no disrespect to Tylen Grable or Ryan Swoboda or any of these other guys that have come through and been nice enough to talk to us here on the Black and Gold Banneret, but they weren't that pair. No duo was as good as those two, and couldn't you help but notice that's when the whole national championship thing happened, right? So right. I feel good about the O-line more than the defensive line too, especially with the departure of Lee Hunter and Ricky Barber, the defensive tackles that were so central, as I've written many times on the blackandgoldbanneret.com.
They do get John Walker back, who missed all of last year, which I highlight. Remember, we argued about the impact of his loss, and I said it was a loss significant. Scott Frost said they didn't have him in the spring because he was still coming back from the injury and stuff, but they're excited to have him back coming here when they report here in July and August. So I'm actually optimistic about the defensive front. And if the offensive line, and one thing Frost keeps, and if you, again, you got to listen very closely when Scott talks, because he's not a yeller when he talks to people. But you got to listen closely. And he talks about building cohesiveness. He never talks about individual talent. Like if you ask about a specific player, he'll tell you about what they bring to the table and everything. But he talks about bringing the cohesiveness. Like he likes the talent that they have on this roster. But the question is, how does it fit? Can they be cohesive? That is something to what you bring up about the offensive line. As an example, in other positions is, do these guys jive together? And I find that interesting that Scott has said that over and over again, which makes sense when you have nearly 70 new faces on this roster. And I think that is something that he is curious about, and they're working on that. And it could be a work in progress. It might go into the season, deep into the season. Who knows? Yeah. So I think that's a couple factors. Now, a couple things he said that I thought was interesting, Kyle, real quick from the UCF. The quarterback position. UCF did not take a quarterback to the Big 12 Media Days.
I thought that was interesting, too. I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
Whereas in contrast, Colorado, Dion took two quarterbacks to the Media Days. So everybody can do it their own style.
That's right.
Scott Frost did an interview with the ESPN. A lot of the Big 12 coverage was on ESPN2 or ESPNU or ESPN Plus. Matt Berry hosted it with Greg McElroy and Brock Osweiler, among others. And Frost sat down with them, and they asked him about the quarterback competition with Ja'Cory Brown and Cam Fancher and Tevian Jackson. And he says, look, he feels good about the three guys, but it's still wide open. He saw a lot from, I'm going to quote him here, quote, in spring, we saw a lot from all three of them that would lead us to believe they can be successful, Frost said. I'll tell you the truth. I would go into the season with any one of the three and feel good that they can go win us games. I just haven't seen any separation yet. So I'm anxious for somebody to really take that next step forward and take the lead. We're not just going to anoint anyone. It's going to be earned. And however long that takes, that's how long it takes to figure it out. But the sooner it kind of reveals itself, I think it will be better for the continuity. There's that word again, Kyle, the continuity and the reps, right? And he kind of went on to say in the interview that, the players usually know. The players usually know who's the guy by the time this is decided. Your reaction to his thoughts there on this open quarterback competition, which I'm sure will be a dominant topic when they report later this month, until we hear something one way or the other and who's starting.
I mean, that sounds like the guy that, decides to stick with and start the player that was booed off the field in the Cure Bowl. By the way, in case you've forgotten who I'm referencing, that, of course, is one Mackenzie Milton after 2016 heading into 2017, right? So, and all of the above being said, I'm looking for someone to separate. Again, another continuing message from spring practices. We don't have spring games anymore, but spring practices. And to be frank and honest, what portions of that we, the media, were allowed to see holds true. There's nobody that really stands out. Now, granted, some transfers have taken place. Obviously, Dylan Risk no longer with the club. Things like that have transpired. I think personally, there's a lot of, I'm going to lack of a better word, smoke in that all the guys are good. Obviously, I know that, Coach Frost can't come out and say, "Oh man, this guy's terrible." I question whether Jakari Brown is the answer. He needs to throw the ball better than we've seen. Granted, there has been months of practice. Well, I shouldn't say months of practice, but months since practice. So maybe he's been working on something. Maybe he can make that push leading into late August to get the start past Jackson. I don't know that that's going to happen, but for those of us that have seen some practices and all that, Jackson is the clear favorite right now. But if he fails to separate, if he starts to struggle, that can change. And I think that's what Scott Frost is telling us right now, is that Jackson's the top guy, but don't put it in pencil, is what he's saying.
Yeah, no, well said there. A couple more things before we take a break. To me, this was something I wish the media, and I'm going to try to maybe get him to expand. It's going to be tough because the odds, he's probably going to just do media scrum with the local media when we get together in a few weeks. But the thing that jumped out to me, Kyle, and you can appreciate this because you cover the National Football League very well. Scott Frost, he was asked when he spoke to the entire media in that scrum in the Big 12 Media Days about his year with the Rams. And he said that he enjoyed his time with Sean McVay, the head coach of the Rams, and Les Snead, the GM, was something that he relished. And he goes, quote, "Yeah, I was really lucky to get there. I'm grateful to Sean and Les and the rest of the guys out there giving me a chance to be out there for a year. It really kind of reignited my passion for what I love to do." That stood out to me. That line right there stood out to me. Being around the game and coaching, and it goes on to say, "I didn't really have any intentions of leaving pro football. UCF opened, and that was an easy decision for me because it was a place that I had so much fun before. I want to bring that again. Let me read that again. That I think has gone under the radar in all this. It kind of, quote, reignited my passion for what I love to do. To me, that is an incredible quote that somehow has been buried in all this. Like, we're focusing on the place from years ago. I am fascinated, Kyle, between that comment and in the introductory press conference, Terry Mohajir emphasized a ton how he spoke to Sean McVay and Les Snead about Scott Frost and how that was important details in this process. It sounded to me, you can tell me I'm misguiding that quote. Scott Frost sounded like a broken man. Like he probably had lost passion for coaching and football, and that Sean McVay and the Rams brought that back out of him. I am not convinced. If he doesn't go to the Rams, I'm not sure he's coaching UCF today here, Kyle. Am I exaggerating this? I found that fascinating.
This is definitely a mysterious ways conversation, Eric Lopez, because I am currently uniquely qualified to comment on the front office and culture of the Rams. But Cal, what are you talking about? You cover the Jacksonville Jaguars on the Duval Dive on the Believe Network. And you're absolutely right, Eric Lopez. But what you may not know is I just had Aaron Cocorelli and Tyler Dragon of the Believe in Rams podcast as guests. Well, why would you do that on a Jacksonville Jaguars podcast? Because two other guys who used to work for Les Snead and Sean McVay in the form of current head coach Liam Cohen and Jimmy Stones, James Gladstone of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the new general manager, both worked in that environment. This is a group that had mini camp in Maui, Eric Lopez. Fun is the name of the game. Caring about football is great. It can make you miserable when things are terrible and you're doing it for sentimental reasons, mostly because Tom Osborne told you. It's different when you're there for the game and the culture is healthier and you're there to have fun while doing it. This is the same thing that's reigniting the Jacksonville Jaguars. Of course it had an effect on Scott Frost. 100%, Eric. It's almost as if I feel like you set this up on purpose, that I would explain how much the Rams culture had an impact and could be something that could reignite Scott Frost. Now, I won't go so bold as to say it wouldn't happen, that he took the UCF job because he's been very vocal about how much he enjoyed his time here, and not just because of the undefeated season, I dare say. But it would have been a factor. It would not have been the slam dunk that it became.
That's my point. Like, is he interested if the job opens, even if he's not with the Rams? Sure. But does he win him over with his interview with the UCF brass? Which, by the way, in the ESPN interview, he confirmed what we had heard, that he met with them in Dallas over a weekend. That he flew from LA and met them in Dallas.
Said much during spring,
sure.
All that.
But my point is, would he be as confident in that process during the interviews? Would Terry Mohajir have had as much confidence in hiring Scott Frost if he didn't have that Rams piece? He didn't have that endorsement from Les Snead and Sean McVay. And the change of that, how it reignited him, I think is fascinating. And I really do think that played a factor, much more than I think people think. I think people have kind of blown that off like, oh, he was there for a year. What kind of role did he have? But I mean, we joke about Sean McVay and that, the joke about how if you just spend 5 minutes with him, you can get a head coaching job.
Oh yeah, I scheduled the Believe podcast. Maybe I should put it in my application. Let's go.
But true, and it's funny material. But clearly, there's a reason why people go after, like Sean McVay. People are successful for the most part. Correct. There's something there that's working, and it's a credit to McVay and the culture that he's built. Listen, the Rams. You know this, when they won the Super Bowl, they were in cap issues. A lot of people thought they would drop out. I mean, McVay's admitted he thought about leaving and maybe going into media, but they've really done a nice job rebuilding that roster, even with some of the issues they've had with the cap. And it was interesting that Scott mentioned that he saw them and how they work, the roster transaction, which guess what? That's a part of college football now.
Hey, what was it? What was it that we talked about this in spring on one of the another episode of the Night Shift podcast? He says he would prefer NFL contracts because at least the commitment's there. That's the difference. But I
well, and it was interesting. He talked about this he calls the revenue sharing a salary cap, which I smiled.
You called that?
It's true.
Come on.
It's true. He's as skeptical as I am about the cap. He's like, he hopes it works. Because he wants, he saw the NFL product up close and how balanced it is and what a great product it is because of that. And he hopes that's the case in college football, but he admits he's skeptical about that, which I've been skeptical about that. I don't know. I think you're on my side on that. Are you skeptical or are you more optimistic on that?
I am not as skeptical as you, but I share in the skepticism because it's different than the NFL trying to wrangle 32 chickens instead of, 130 cats,
right
into the 100%. I don't know why I changed animals mid-analogy, but you see where I'm going.
I got you. So no, it was interesting that he said that, and I agree with him, because it is right. Where I really believe Ohio State's going to follow the rules and say, yeah, sure, we're not going to spend more than $15 million. Like, I find that hard to believe. I mean, even
the NFL has a revenue sharing element to it, and salary caps are in place. You can't have a robber baron school like Texas Tech steal a Lee Hunter.
It's a good segue. Coming up, actually, you're the host. You tell us what's coming up here on this Night Shift episode.
Coming up, a little bit more conversation surrounding more of the Big 12 portion of the conversations there at Big 12 Media Day. And are we finally getting that space game that we've been talking about, or at least I've been talking about, Eric Lopez? We'll find out in just a moment on the Under This Break here on the Night Shift podcast. You're listening, of course, to the Night Shift podcast. And of course, welcome back to this Big 12 Media Days edition of the Night Shift podcast. Kyle Nash, Student of the Game, Eric Lopez in. And listen, I know a big thing we were talking about is how accessible the Big 12 is for the team surrounding it. Another element of accessibility that's improved things for all of college football is the college football playoff. It's made it so accessible that teams that don't even belong get in, like SMU, right, Eric? Anyways, so with all that being said, see, you thought I was going to take a shot at your Knowles. That wasn't happening here. No,
I was going to say Indiana, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. So with all that in mind, there was a lot of talk about Brett Yormark again calling things out into the carpet. And this was referenced when they were here to have the Big 12 conference meetings locally over here. But again, pushing hard for the 5 and 11 format, meeting, of course, that you have the 5 guaranteed bids and the rest are at large. And we've discussed on this podcast that I think that's more about forcing the SEC to advocate for themselves rather than press for just one more guaranteed playoff spot in the Power Conference. That's kind of where I've sat. But this accessibility piece, I think that kind of matches what Scott Frost was talking about. How if you do everything right in the Big 12, you can win the conference. And I think the part he left out is if you win the conference, you're probably getting to the playoff where anything is possible. Heck, what was it? Arizona State nearly took down a Texas team, for example. Probably should have Eric Lopez taken down.
Yeah, look, as of now, the automatic bid goes to the conference champion. So you're definitely locked into one. I think the big question is with the 5+11, which is what Brett Yormark is endorsing and reiterated that at Big 12 Media Days. And certainly, by the way, all the other conferences get going next week. So you're going to hear from Greg Sankey next week in Atlanta. And then the Big 10, because the Big 10 to me is the one that wants that 4+4+ thing. Because I keep saying this, I don't think the SEC cares deep down. I think they're just going to go with the flow because they're going to benefit either way. Like the SEC is always going to have a bunch of teams. The Big 10 is the one I have the big question mark because do we really think the Big 10 has 4 or 5 good teams that are worthy of a playoff? I don't.
That hasn't mattered, Eric. I don't mean to cut you off here, but you got to understand this first iteration kind of spits in the face of what you're saying because it was the SEC that was forced to sit at home, right?
Well, but that's right. The big thing the SEC is pushing for is schedule strength.
Right.
That's you're going to hear about that next week. And I think that's something where the Big 12's got to be careful about because they got to win some non-conference games. Like we could talk about biasness and this or that. The Big 12 didn't do themselves any favors not winning non-conference marquee games last year.
Correct. It's a better conference than anyone thinks, but if you have that perception against you, it's no different than the American. You got to beat somebody outside the conference before people will start to talk about you. You're absolutely right.
Correct. So I think the SEC, the thing they want is schedule strength because they know they're going to benefit from that based on the SEC slate. Correct. So I think that's where the SEC is coming from. But I don't think the SEC cares about 5+11 versus the 4-4 whatever model. I think they want the scheduling formula. They want reward the quote team that has the toughest schedule. Don't reward, i.e., Indiana, who played absolutely nobody.
Which is how we got here in the first place, Eric.
Yes,
that everyone keeps forgetting. We got rid of the BSC. I said what I said. It's a joke.
I know what you said. I know what you meant.
It's for the audience. I know you know, but we got rid of the BSC because people were hiding behind weaker schedules. Then we got the college football playoff, which kind of alleviated that. Was imperfect, but at least people had to play somebody. And now we're right back where we are thanks to Indiana and SMU, showing the world that schedule doesn't matter again.
Well, because the problem is I think people are still married to the win-loss record. Well, this team went 11-1 because that was Indiana's argument, right? They went 11-1. Well, yeah, if you didn't play anybody, you could go 11-1 too. Like, awesome. But to me, you got to have some meat in the bones there. And that was my issue with Indiana, especially Indiana, more so than SMU, but even SMU. And listen, the Big 12, their thing was BYU beat SMU head-to-head. Why wasn't BYU considered over SMU? They weren't even talked about. So that's why the Big 12 is not doing this whole media press thing, which I think is kind of silly. I think perceptions are for what they are, but you got to win games on the field, non-conference. So I like the 5+11 personally. That's my preference.
Yeah.
And I think, look, they got until December to figure out this playoff. I think there's a lot of politicking going around, and I think the big thing is, I'll be honest with you, Kyle. If they can't agree on 16 and just stay at 12, I'm not upset. Like, I actually think 16 is too much anyway. I think we've jumped the shark. So to be honest with you, I hope they bicker and don't agree and just stay at 12. Heck, go back to 8. Go back to 8. That's what it should have been. Should have been at 8. I know it was never 8, but it should have been 8.
I agree with you. I said 8 as well, and that's a separate conversation. I totally get it. I did. We attended that church for some time and accepted the fact that it's been torn down. But but this particular piece, yeah, if you're going to go to 16 teams, what Brett Yormark is right about, I shouldn't say what he's right about because how much. I won't speculate. What I'll say is the point that Brett Yormark captures, well as the deciding of things on the field mattering. And unfortunately, we didn't see them matter well enough. I don't care who you are, whether you're the SEC or the Big 12. because of the aforementioned SMU getting in, because of the aforementioned Indiana getting in, and groups of that ilk sneaking in and proving how unworthy they actually were, right? With all the above being said, though, the deciding it on the field is what we were hoping for in the first place. So obviously you agree with that concept.
I also think, by the way, part of the reason why Brent Yarmark is supporting this, even if whether you agree, maybe whether you think it benefits the Big 12 or some, might hurt the Big 12, because maybe you rather have the 2 guaranteed spots if you're the Big 12 versus 1 guaranteed spot and fight for the other spots, right? But I think Brent Yarmark, who has been very outspoken about the college basketball tournament expanding, and that has been quietly another hot topic that is going to play out here in the next couple of weeks. I've been told there's a lot of people that want to expand this to 76, which is going to cause a huge outcry.
That is insane.
From the college basketball media and fans, and rightfully so. But Yarmark is one of the big proponents of this. Why? Because it benefits the Big 12. More at-large teams available. That means the Big 12 can go from being an 8 to 9 bid league to 10 to 11 bids, and the SEC will benefit. You know what I mean? Like, this will favor the power conferences. They're not going to benefit the mid-majors. So I think Brett, in a lot of ways, is like, look, I want to go this format for football, even if it doesn't help us on football, but I'm doing it for the good of the game. But in return, can we expand the basketball, which would benefit? You know what I mean? So there's a horse trading going on here, and I think that's also part of this. That's why I don't overreact to what comments are being said now, because it's all political, and they're going to say what they want to throw out there and cause a stir. But I do think we're going to see changes, and I would not be surprised, and I expect, actually, from what I'm hearing, is a lot of people think we're going to go from 68 to 76 starting this upcoming year in college basketball, which is going to be insane.
Wow. Okay. Well,
it could be as soon as this year, from what I'm hearing.
What that tells me is the NCAA is feeling the heat from the crown, and they're trying to watch that right out the window.
Well, they're feeling it from the crowd, but they're feeling it from the power leagues too. Like the NCAA's, don't get rid of us. Don't get rid of us. All right, well, then do this. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what's going on there. Again, the little guy is the one that's going to get splat. It's going to get splat as this goes on, because remember, if you're not a power we've talked so much about the salary cap with the 20 million, 20.5, the mid-majors aren't even sniffing that. Not even sniffing that. So that gap's going to widen even more
those reverberations are still going on, man. I don't even think we know.
Still is. So that's the story there with what Brett Yarmark said, but he feels good, and I do agree with him on this. I think they feel more comfortable in this Big 12 now than it was, say, a couple of years ago, where there was a lot of uncertainty and things like that. Let's talk about the Big 12 here a couple minutes here. Interesting, last year.
Yes.
Who was the team that everybody talked about? It was Dion in Colorado, right?
Of course.
Travis Hunter and Shador. It was the hoopla. This year, in my opinion, that team is Texas Tech. Texas Tech, because of all the money they've spent on their roster, including Lee Hunter, the oil company, the fact the donor, he was at media day.
Of course you were.
He was there.
You bought these toys. Of course you're going to show them off. Are you kidding me?
He was not. Right. And he talked about why he's doing it and helping college athletics, because he does make some points that, listen, all these sports are endangered with this revenue sharing and all the money and all that stuff. So I get it. But it was interesting to see. To me, Kyle, there is no coach in the Big 12 under more pressure than Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Because he's got the most expensive roster, and it's not good enough to just go 7-5, Kyle. That, to me, a lot of eyes on how Texas Tech will produce in football, fresh off an Elite Eight run at men's basketball. And yes, I will throw this sport out there, making it to the national championship series in softball because of the money.
Because we're talking about money, it's a profitable sport. Of course you can bring it up, Eric Lopez. It's not just bias. I don't care how much you're the salt and the stick ball. Money's still green, baby. I hear you.
To me, Texas Tech's got the most pressure with Joey McGuire there. Now, one of the players you mentioned was Lee Hunter.
Yes.
Let's just say he had a nice jewelry around his neck.
I heard about this.
And let's just say it wasn't. Yeah, you heard about it. Which, hey, man, more props to him. Good guy. Media question about him and going to Texas Tech, okay? I want your reaction to this, Kyle, because this was the part that I was also looking forward to. Now, there's been rumors that Hunter took a $1.9 million deal from Texas Tech from Cody Campbell, who I mentioned was also at Big 12 Media Days. One of the media questions to Lee Hunter: why did you decide to transfer from UCF? Quote, they didn't show me my worth. Then someone came into the picture and showed me my worth. Blessed and thankful for Texas Tech. Your reaction to that, Kyle?
I don't think that's worded quite the way he meant it, because and let me add a little context that not a lot of people have, but I have heard from sources high in UCF athletics that Lee Hunter had gone to UCF upon being offered the 1.9 mil and said, hey, listen, and keep in mind, this is all alleged, right? If you give me just $1 million, I'll stay. UCF told him, first of all, we can't do that because we aren't oil barons. And second, go take care of you, man. Lee Hunter's got a 5-year-old, dude. If I'm not in my 20s, you give me a $1.9 million to move to Texas right now. And I'm 40. I'm a man. I'm 45 still, technically. I'm going to say no to that. Nah. It would be, and granted, there's a little bit of bravado in that answer. If you don't have the context, if you haven't spoken to Lee Hunter, if you don't understand that he loved it here, you may be taken aback by that particular selection of diction.
And by the way, in his defense, he did an interview with the UCF media outlet and said he still loves UCF. He loved his time there and everything. I agree with you. And you bring up a great point that I think some people did. Like, I didn't know about this until this week. He has a son.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hello, that's the most important thing. Take care of the kid. Yeah, take the million, buddy. I don't blame you.
And I get to keep playing football and keep myself in the conversation for being able to do even more if I get to the league, bro. You know, no,
props to him, man. He's a good guy. I like him. And again, that's why I hate this portion where people are going to go after these college athletes because they're going to be paid X amount. Hey, man, props to them. They're the ones putting their bodies on the line. Are you? You know what I mean? Like,
and that's the best thing about that's the best thing about these local media days is this is when you get to talk to these guys and meet them and know who they are and know the ones that are more humble and are family men and all of that.
Well, let me ask you then. You covered Lee.
Yeah.
How will he fare at Texas Tech with that expectation? Part of a defense that and you know this because they've spent a ton of money on the offensive line. They've spent a ton of. It's been interesting how Texas Tech has used its money from a football roster standpoint. They have spent a ton of money on the trenches, with Lee Hunter being one of them because they determined he was the best defensive lineman available in the portal at that time, right? Yep. How do you think this will this work? Will Lee Hunter flourish over there? What's your early thoughts there?
It's hard to believe that he won't at least be serviceable right now. Granted, at that price tag, you need to flourish. And I think it'll be the adjustment will be life is going to be different when you don't have Ricky Barber on the other side to help you out when you're tired. So obviously he still needs to keep working out. He obviously needs to get his stamina better. It's always kind of been an issue for him. But then again, I'm pretty sure that Texas Tech at this point can buy linebackers that can actually tackle running backs in the Big 12, where UCF had struggled with that, leaving he and Barber on the field for upwards of 35 to even 40 minutes in some games on defense. That's problematic when you're a big dude like Lee Hunter, who's already defying physics of what the human body is supposed to be capable of, right? So, but the short answer is, yeah, I think he can flourish. And to his credit, because the storyline is what it is at other places, right? This is the same program that paid the $5 million for the 20th best recruit, probably the top left tackle in the nation. They're not even going to be looking at Lee at $1.9 million. So all that stuff's going to break in his favor, and all he's got to do is break through the middle and tackle the other team's quarterback. I think he's got a fighting chance, man.
Would you, if you had that money, resources, okay? Let's just say I put you in charge of a program that had the resources that Texas Tech has. Would you spend it the same way they're spending it or would you spend it in a different positions?
Not only would I spend it the way that they're spending it, building a team inside out, there's another team you might have heard of whose head coach I got to talk to a few years ago in Arizona. Another bit of Big Ten country, right? Arizona, yeah. Thing is that coach was Nick Sirianni of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was building a team that would eventually dominate Patrick Mahomes II and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 2 years later. After, by the way, losing by a single score in that game on a controversial call. So, yeah, I would do it that way, too.
Well, and like full disclosure, I was at Oklahoma City in May for the Big 12 softball championship. Some of the donors that are involved in this were there. And I don't think people understand this. Like, I think the narrative outside is, oh, well, it's national title or bust, which I think is idiotic. First of all, this is a school that had never won a Big 12 title. Period. Like, I think people are missing that. Like, and I spoke to a couple of these people because obviously that was a big story on the softball end because Nyjah Kennedy making over $1 million in softball. By the way, every dollar worth got them to somewhere they've never been to before, the National Championship Series in the World Series. They won a Big 12 title for the first time in program history. They celebrated, man. They enjoyed the bleep out of it. Trust me. And I think from a football standpoint, they're probably thinking the same thing. Like, let's win a Big 12 title and get to the playoff. And go from, that's what they're shooting for because, hey, those bleeping bleeps, Oklahoma Sooners and Texas Longhorns are no longer there. All these SEC schools are spending the money we can do. And I think that's their argument. Whether you like it or not, I'm not going to get into all that because I'm tired of the topic, but that's their point of view. And I know in Texas, invested. They believe in investing in the athlete. Now, their argument from a football standpoint is they believe they can recruit skill position players as good with anybody in the country. Where they have struggled to recruit is in the trenches because they lose them out to the Oklahomas, the Texases, the SEC. You know what I mean? So they believe that's why. So that is why correct. So that's why they're investing in those positions, Kyle, in that regard. And, but I am not against. I don't have an issue with Texas Tech investing in all their sports. I actually applaud it. And I feel like a lot of times the majority of people that are not criticizing them are people that, that don't have the money or just, sour grapes or whatever. Like if UCF had all that money, are we really going to complain if we're spending? I don't see us complain like, oh, I can't believe UCF spent that much on this guy and this guy and this guy. As long as they produce, Lee Hunter has to produce because we saw with KJ last year when he didn't produce, it got ugly.
And that was for allegedly 300,000.
Way less. Yeah. Way less. But that's why, like, for anybody, for example, to criticize him going out paying $1 million for a softball pitcher, she made the impact. One player can make an impact in softball. It is interesting to see if this investment will work for Texas Tech. To me, that's the number one storyline of the Big 12 in 2025.
Yeah, a pitcher in stickball can do that. You're 100% right. And I listen. To your point, I don't know that I would personally advocate for that much of the money being a driving force for my recruiting as an AD, because money can dry up. And it's one thing to have angry fans. It's another to deal with pissed off investors, because that's when people start getting fired, right?
No doubt. So,
at any rate, let's keep things in Texas.
We'll see if this revenue share cap settles some. I think we'll calm some of this down, but a couple other notes from the Big 12.
Oh, yeah.
Colorado, I mentioned it. They were the talk of the sport last year. Boy, it's been quiet this year, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's been under the radar. Dion was there. People are we don't know who their starting quarterback. Apparently, they're going to play two quarterbacks because they got the 5-star recruit that he brought in with the transfer quarterback that he brought in to replace Shedeur Sanders. He spoke to the media on Wednesday. One of the things that struck me, what he said was, there's a part of him that's excited because last year he had to coach a team and he had to be a father because he had obviously his boys. This year, although
by the way, includes Travis Hunter because he considered him as something that's been said many times.
100%. Whereas they're not there. So he could be a coach, even though he loves these players like he would his sons. But he says he could be more locked in on that. He doesn't believe they have a player on the roster as talented as those guys, but he likes the collection of talent more this year as a team than they've had the previous 2 years. That was his quote. to the
like
Big 12.
cohesion.
So what?
Sounds like cohesion, right?
You react now. He joked about, hey, Joey McGuire, can you send us a few bucks? Like that's the thing. Like, but your reaction to that, I feel like Colorado, I feel everybody's off the radar on them. And I actually think this is good for Dion. I'm intrigued to see what he looks like. I think they're undervalued here. They still have one of the best offensive linemen in the country who we saw last year.
Again, is everything. You beat me to it, man. When you see Colorado's listed next to the name of a preseason all-conference, but granted, I get it's preseason, but the fact that this guy was good enough to still break through in the eyes of the hype and the media out there to even get on a list with the way that offensive linemen are usually chosen just based off of who was good last year is kind of insane to me, especially when Colorado's offensive line became so notorious for being as bad as they were. Granted, getting better consistently throughout the year. That has to be mentioned because most people won't, but I find it fascinating that Dion has put himself in the space to maybe potentially have figured out how to recruit offensive lineman. Clearly his one great weakness going from Jacksonville State to Colorado there. But hey, what have I said before on this program? Even the toughest thing to do when you're transitioning conferences is to understand upgrading offensive line play. UCF was in a position to have a line good enough to have a almost 1,600 yard rusher. So they did pretty good with that. They just were bad at a lot of other places. Dion, however, is the inverse. Skill position players all over the place. A dangerous defensive line, at least the offensive line lesser known until lately. It puts them in position to be fascinating, Eric Lopez. I will definitely agree with you on that.
Caden Salter is the quarterback to transfer from Liberty, who you saw up close in person. He is among there with the 5-star recruit Lewis there for Colorado. One of the things the Big 12 is very excited about, a lot of quarterbacks back, which makes them think that they could have a really strong year because of the experienced quarterbacks coming back, like Sam Levitt at Arizona State's back, Josh Hoover at TCU, Rocco Beck at Iowa State's back. So those are just some of the top guys. Avery Johnson, who I know you like at Kansas State, is back. So those are just Jalen Daniels, if he's healthy, at Kansas, Fafita at Arizona. So there's some good guys there. And even a Brandon Sorsby, who's in his second year at Cincinnati after starting his career at Indiana, Connor Wegman. That is a reason why, if you're for the Big 12, if you think they're going to have a monster year, is the experienced talent that they have coming back at the quarterback position. That is the big positive that could maybe help the Big 12, hopefully, maybe from their perspective, be a multi-bid league and make a lot of noise this year.
That's where you got to be careful, though, Eric Lopez. There are a lot of running backs that went into the NFL this year out of the conference, and also a lot of offensive linemen as well. That is the kind of thing that could lead to disappointment for quarterbacks who have that kind of hype. So make sure you look for all of that and part of it as well on offense. And hey, at the end of the day, listen, so long as somebody gets some people that can tackle, we'll find out what happens on Big 12, where the defense goes to die, allegedly, right? Unless you're Lee Hunter. Apparently that's where you go to get paid.
I was going to say, he would beg to differ with you on that. All right, we cannot wrap up the show without I have to bring this up. I don't care about this topic, but I know you love this topic because you've been preaching about this for a while. And we have now word, according to the Houston Chronicle, about Houston and UCF being interested and perhaps the space game, that becoming a space game rivalry game with Houston and UCF. Terry Mohajir.
A space cup, if you will.
Sure. Terry Mohajir was quoted in the Houston Chronicle. He talked to Joseph Duarte over there at Big 12 Media Days about how he's talked to the previous AD at Houston, and he ensures he'll talk to Eddie Nunez, the new Houston AD, about the fact that both of these teams maybe could play as a space game. You've been campaigning for this for a while, so I'm just going to give you the platform here.
Listen, back in the day when we were first talking about this with the transition of the Big 12, keep in mind, we're pre-NIL, we're pre all of this hullabaloo that's now commonplace, right? We were only 5 years removed from Leonard Fournette sitting out a bowl game and that getting people to clutch their pearls, and now entire teams essentially are skipping out on bowl games, right? All of that. But in a world where brand, where advertisement, where revenue, where that likeness not just for the players, but the branding of the schools themselves are a bigger deal than ever before. Eric Lopez, the Space Cup being a thing for Houston and UCF for two schools, by the way, that are among the bottom revenue earners in the conference. It's an opportunity they can't pass up, especially when you're desperate to bring in revenue to keep up with the Joneses. This is long overdue, and now they have even more reason to do it. I tried to tell you that this was inevitable, Eric Lopez, but you wouldn't listen. I can't hear you, buddy.
Well, I think because I'm just muting myself because I'm just kind of like shaking my head on this. You're probably going to end up being right on this. It is worth noting that the Houston UCF game this year in Orlando will be on a Friday night in November 7th. And it's already the space game for UCF. They will wear their space jerseys for that game. So it's not like they're going on a limb. So we'll see what happens. I do break that down a little bit in the column article there about the 5 things we learned from the Big 12 Media Days from a UCF and Scott Frost perspective. Check that out on blackandgoldbanneret.com. Boy, did it not feel good to talk an hour of football nonstop there, Kyle? That felt good. I'm not going to lie.
Hey, listen, I mean, this and after recording the Duval Dive podcast and talking Rams too, there's so much football. You got me. I'm excited. Listen, but I appreciate you acknowledging that it's time for stickball sports to go to bed. We're headed towards football, and I listen, we are aligned once again, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, you'll have better predictions this year. I know I had horrible predictions last year myself, so maybe we can clean that up a little bit heading into the 2025 season.
Only one way to go, but up. Only one way to go by up. Keep it on blackandgoldbanneret.com. Make sure you vote. We got the bannies are out right now. Make sure you vote on all the categories. That's on blackandgoldbanneret.com. Follow us on the social media. Where can they follow us, Kyle, for all the social media?
Yes, obviously follow. It's UCF Banneret _SBN on Twitter, of course, Black and Gold Banneret on Instagram, of course. And hey, shouts to Bryson Turner for the work of him putting together a good portion of the Banneret, Black and Gold Banneret Awards, aka the Bannies. Eric Lopez, yourself a big contributor with that as well. I came in where I could. Not a whole lot of football opinions to be had in this year's edition of the Bannies, you might notice. I was once a good luck charm, and now I'm not. The two programs I cover most are the ones that are doing not so hot at the moment. But, of course, look for work from Donnie Docs, Don Struble as well there on the Bannies. Everybody gets involved. I think you might even see a guest appearance or two from our own Jeff Sharon in there in different places. So make sure you check out the Banny Awards. Eric Lopez, remind me your handle. I'm dropping it. It's at
Eric Lopez Elo. Eric Lopez.
It is Eric Lopez Elo. I got it backwards. Of course, I'm Kyle Nash, Student of the Game. Find me at the SOTG on all things social media. So, for the Sultan of Stickball himself, Eric Lopez, I am Kyle Nash, Student of the Game. This has been the Night Shift Podcast. Until next time, everyone, go Knights! Charge on.